It's hard to believe now, but there was a brief time, an ever so small moment, when AEW's Wardlow seemed to have more momentum than then AEW World Champion, Hangman Adam Page. He was involved in arguably the greatest storyline in AEW history, the MJF CM Punk feud. While that feud was obviously a way to build up MJF as a credible main eventer, it was also serving a purpose for his bodyguard too. For nearly 3 years, we went on a journey with MJF and Wardlow, as we all anticipated that one day Wardlow would have enough of Max and break free from his tyranny. The tiniest of seeds were planted along the years that made us want to see Wardlow completely demolish MJF. Fans likened this storyline to the Batista Triple H story, which made Batista a star and catapulted him into the stratosphere, forever cementing him as a top guy in WWE. That's what this should have been for Wardlow. But instead, when it was all said and done, Wardlow lost all his momentum and was never as white hot as he was in the lead up to him turning on MJF. In my opinion, this is without a doubt a top 3 fumble in the entirety of AEW's history, and it's been a topic that's been highly requested by many of you. It's about time we talked about the mishandling of a wrestler who was on the cusp of superstardom, but saw his star dwindle before he even got the chance to shine. Who's to blame? Is it AEW? Is it Wardlow? Is it both? We'll soon find out. This is a critique of Wardlow's booking in AEW. Wardlow had the very rare privilege of having pre-recorded tapes hyping up his AEW debut. These video packages let the audience know that Wardlow was a force to reckon with. We saw him fighting off a group of menacing men who dared disturb him while he was on a date. Fun fact, the woman in this video posing as his date was none other than Anna Jay, who was still about a year away from making her AEW debut. AEW rarely airs these promo packages, and at times it's costed them dearly. Think of the debut of The Butcher and the Blade, where you could have heard a pin drop due to the audience not knowing who those guys were. Thankfully, Wardlow was being hyped up pretty regularly on AEW TV, so that when he finally made his debut to help MJF take out Cody Rhodes, we at the very least knew his name. By 2019 AEW standards, Wardlow was a huge guy who had the look and presence of a star. Personally speaking, I was instantly sold on Wardlow being MJF's bodyguard. It allowed him to get consistent TV time with a prominent wrestler, but it also helped him slowly develop his character. You see, early on Wardlow was introduced as a man of few words that could kick your ass. We usually saw him do all of MJF's dirty work while MJF just watched on from the sidelines. For the longest time, that's all Wardlow really was. He made his AEW debut in November in 2019, and yet we wouldn't see him have his first match for the promotion until February 2020. If you recall, I said Wardlow made his debut by helping MJF handle Cody Rhodes. Cody was looking for a match against MJF, and so MJF put some obstacles in Cody's way in order for him to get that match. One of those obstacles required Cody to beat Wardlow in a steel cage match, the first in AEW history. Now, ideally, no talent wants to make their big wrestling debut taking a loss. But in this case, Wardlow looked like an absolute monster, and it took Cody jumping off the top of the cage to beat Wardlow. Sure, Wardlow could have had some random matches before this match, but ultimately I don't think this loss cost him. MJF went on to have his match with Cody, and from here on out, for a very long time, Wardlow simply became a character in the background. During the pandemic, AEW filmed exclusively in Jacksonville out of Daly's Place, and of course, MJF was one of the main stars of the show. It's hard to find a moment where Wardlow did anything of note though the months following his cage match against Cody. I remember him having a pretty decent lumberjack match against Luchasaurus a whole 4 months after his match against Cody. Besides that, he was mostly relegated to dark. It wasn't until MJF began his feud with Moxley that we saw Wardlow get some time to shine. During MJF's presidential-style campaign to become AEW World Champion, we saw moments where Max would belittle Wardlow. In storyline, Wardlow had a job in AEW because he was hired by MJF. Therefore, no matter how much animosity between the two was building, Wardlow had to stay in his lane if he wanted to keep his job. These small moments caused a lot of excitement within the AEW fanbase. It made us want to see Wardlow put MJF in his place. We knew that one day it would happen, but not anytime soon. AEW in 2020 was very good at planting seeds for future programs. It's something that I feel the company has mostly lost over the past year or so. But during the pandemic, AEW was very story-driven, and moments like these helped build anticipation. MJF would lose his world title match against Jon Moxley at All Out 2020 and would go on to place the blame on Wardlow for distracting the referee, allowing Moxley to hit his finisher, which he was banned from using in this match. Something I do remember around this time is that Wardlow would be in the Full Gear Eliminator tournament where he would lose to Hangman Page in a very good match. Wardlow rarely wrestled the big names in AEW at this point, but when he did, he showed a lot of promise with his agility and of course, the beautiful Swanton Bomb. Around this time, Wardlow and MJF would join the Inner Circle, which I think we all knew would only be temporary. During Wardlow's time in the Inner Circle, there was a hilarious running gag where he and Jake Hager would just constantly stare each other down, as they were both the big eyes of the group. One thing that Wardlow always excelled at were his facial expressions. This man could emote. Anyway, MJF and Wardlow left the Inner Circle and formed the Pinnacle alongside FTR and Shawn Spears. This group had so much potential, but sadly it feels as if they fizzled out very fast. The Pinnacle were involved in the first ever Blood and Guts match against the Inner Circle, getting the huge win over Jericho's group. Then when fans came back, the Pinnacle would lose against the Inner Circle in a Stadium Stampede match. The group would quietly fade away over the next several months. The fact that after this, besides the awful MMA cage match, I can't really remember what Wardlow did for the rest of the year should tell you that he was still mostly treading water. I mean, sure, we were constantly reminded that MJF had control over him and that he was growing tired of Max's abuse, but it was a very, very slow burn. For example, MJF would eliminate Wardlow from the Dynamite Diamond Ring Battle Royal, but Wardlow had to simply keep on keeping on. It wasn't until MJF's feud with Punk that things finally reached a boiling point, and fans were ready to finally see some payoff. During MJF's feud with Punk, MJF would do the same thing he always does by putting obstacles in his opponent's way in order to get to him. The biggest development came during Punk's match against Wardlow. Wardlow was dominating and had Punk all but beaten, but instead of simply allowing Wardlow to pin Punk, he demanded that he keep punishing Punk, which would work against their favor as it gave Punk an opening to roll Wardlow up for the pin. This obviously upset both Wardlow and MJF for different reasons. Neither were happy with each other anymore. Tension was at an all-time high to the point where MJF slapped Wardlow for the whole world to see. A few days later, Wardlow would win the Face of the Revolution ladder match, therefore earning a shot at the TNT title. But later that night, he had an even bigger moment. During the final moments of the dog collar match between Punk and MJF, Wardlow would come out with the Dynamite Diamond Ring, the object that helped MJF win so many of his matches over the years. However, instead of handing it to MJF as he had so many times over the past couple of years, he handed it to CM Punk, which got a thunderous ovation from the crowd. This helped Punk finally defeat MJF, but most importantly, it cemented the fact that Wardlow was done with MJF. This part of Wardlow's story was done fantastically, and it was worth the wait in my opinion. Over the next several months, we would see Wardlow and MJF have a feud which would see MJF use his power over Wardlow in a bid to humiliate him. Because remember, MJF still technically had Wardlow under contract. First, Max and Shawn Spears would cost Wardlow the TNT title. Then MJF would strip Wardlow of his entrance music, had him come out to the ring in handcuffs, and even forbid him from wrestling altogether. We'd see Wardlow breaking into the building on some weeks in order to try to get to MJF, which would make the crowd go crazy. Overall, I think AEW did a good job building this story up. Of course, MJF once more put obstacles in his opponent's way, and Wardlow passed them with ease. There was just no way that Wardlow was going into this match against MJF at Double or Nothing to lose. He was white hot, he needed to win. Fans were clamoring for it. More so, they were clamoring for him to completely annihilate MJF. If Wardlow were to beat MJF, he'd be free of his contract. But then something happened that in my opinion derailed the Wardlow hype faster than his meteoric rise. On the weekend of the pay-per-view, MJF reportedly was close to going home due to creative frustrations with the company. This story obviously took the internet by storm, and the talk of the weekend became MJF instead of Wardlow. Obviously, I doubt this was Max's intention, but in hindsight, this proved to be a huge factor in Wardlow's squash win over MJF feeling hollow. Wardlow finally got his All Elite graphic, but all anyone was talking about was if MJF was leaving AEW or not. Of course, the promo he cut the following Dynamite only further cemented this. But what happened after Double or Nothing is a huge blur when it comes to Wardlow. On the same Dynamite where MJF cut the scathing promo on Tony Khan, Wardlow had a match against JD Drake. Why does Tony Khan do this? It's 2023, squash matches are redundant, especially when they're booked as often as they are in AEW. Then the 20-on-1 handicap match against Jobbers. You're telling me we couldn't get Wardlow in a proper feud after his big win over MJF? What's worse is that Wardlow did end up getting another TNT title shot, but it happened over a month after his match against MJF. And let's be real here, the TNT title is beyond repair at this point. This is where my problems with the follow-up on Wardlow stem from. Had AEW capitalized on him the right way, he could have been thrust into the world title scene almost immediately. I'm not saying he should have been world champion, but he could have been in a feud with a top-level guy after making such easy work out of MJF. Instead, Wardlow was made to settle on the mid-card, a level that he should have completely bypassed when he beat MJF. The AEW roster is deep. Wardlow could have been used in a more prominent role. Him beating Scorpio Sky and becoming TNT champion almost felt like a consolation prize at this point. Defending against the likes of Tony Nese, Ryan Nemeth, and Matt Taven was the final nail in the coffin. One of the few shining moments during Wardlow's TNT title run didn't even involve the TNT title. It involved him once again teaming with FTR to take on Jay Lethal and the Motor City Machine Guns. But that was short-lived. Samoa Joe entering the fray certainly helped Wardlow feel like he was interacting with a major player again. Wardlow was a nice distraction that I wish could have came sooner, but even that just turned into both men playing hot potato with the title. Oh yeah, and Joe cut Wardlow's hair off. The same hot potato happened afterwards with Powerhouse Hobbs. Wardlow should have moved on from the TNT title long by this point, but for whatever reason Tony Khan pigeonholed him into this role. By this point, Wardlow is unsalvageable and he's a reigning 3-time TNT champion. Let that sink in. He's a champion, yet he's damaged goods. Post MJF feud, we rarely saw Wardlow featured in a way that made him feel important. He cut a really good promo during a sit-down interview which showed that he can talk when given good material. A last minute out of nowhere pairing with Arn Anderson just felt like creative throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. A loss to Luchasaurus for the TNT title on the premiere episode of Collision was all I needed to see to know that Wardlow needs a fresh start. This version of Wardlow was let down by creative. Some people say he's not charismatic enough and that it's his own fault. That certainly played a role, but how charismatic can you be when you're facing Ryan Nemeth? The MJF Wardlow story could have gone down as one of the best stories in AEW history. Instead, it's a huge bag of what-ifs. What can AEW do to save Wardlow? At this point, I think he needs an entirely new character. This version of the character is finished. AEW is a sink-or-swim environment. The addition of Collision has allowed a handful of wrestlers rehab their characters in ways that were impossible only a few months ago. Let the Collision booking team work their magic on Wardlow like they did with Ricky Starks. I think there's still a way for Wardlow to become a mainstay on AEW television. It'll take some work from all parties involved, but it can be done. No more excuses. This is AEW after all, where the impossible happens.